following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Hey, it's time for Belly Up Fantasy Live. Welcome in, everybody. We are going to talk about the AFC and NFC North this morning. What do they need to do in the draft upcoming to give us a boost fantasy-wise? It'll help them, obviously, on the field, but we're looking for fantasy points. So what does each team in the AFC and NFC North need to do to up their fantasy quotient? Will we see a changing of the guard at running back in Cincinnati? Will we see a new quarterback in Baltimore? All that and more coming up here on Belly Up Fantasy Live.
Jalen Reagor getting traded to Minnesota changes nothing.
6'4" guys running 4.4s. These guys don't grow on trees. And a lot of times I'm willing to bet on, especially, long term, on the freak athlete.
You don't ever want to overreact to what guys look like in preseason. There's been a ton of preseason all-stars that never make rosters or never pan out. There's the whistle. That means it's time for kickoff.
That's right.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome into Belly Up Fantasy Live. I'm your host, Chase Thornton, coming to you as always from the Mott and Bailey Basement Bar. With me, as always, is Kevin Wilson from down there in Texas. And we're ready to talk some AFC and NFC North fantasy needs here coming up in the upcoming draft. We are 4 weeks away from the draft, less than 4 weeks away, less than 28 days from now. We've got 4 Sundays between now and then. What we're going to do for you is, like I said, today we'll start with the AFC and NFC North. We're going to go team by team and see what do those teams need to do in the upcoming draft to boost essentially their offensive prospects. I mean, we're talking fantasy. If there's something that's really pressing defensively that we think could actually give some teams a boost from a defensive standpoint, we'll talk about that too. That might be especially relevant today because these were not great fantasy DSTs this year in the AFC and NFC North. But that's what we're going to talk about today and going forward. Kevin, how are you doing this morning? What do you know, friend?
Chase is doing, I'm doing great. And the storms passed through here before they had a chance to, build, and a lot of the other places in the country had issues, as you know, but they got out of here. We've had a great weekend here. It's been sunny and nice. So life is good here.
Excellent. Yeah, we got absolutely crushed with some snow over the weekend here. It was pretty rough going up here. They actually, the county put out this is not an April Fool's joke. Do not travel. Stay in your house. They had to use the plows just to get to people who were trapped on the roads, not even to clear roads. They didn't even come plow my street until well into late afternoon the other day. So it's been weird up here, but hey, it is such as life in northern Wisconsin.
That's right.
We have another one of these or two before we actually see the sun. So let's get right into it. Yeah, let's talk about it. Now, the draft is coming up, and that's about the biggest excitement we have right now. Like I said, I've brought it up before. We're in kind of a dead zone right now in terms of anything actually happening, unless we finally get some movement on the Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson front. But the waves of free agency are over. And we're all looking forward to the end of the month here. We've got 8 teams here in the AFC and NFC North that all look like they could be competitive. Obviously we have the Bengals and the Ravens from the AFC North playoff teams and looking good. The Browns missed out, but they were in it until the last month or so, mathematically at least. Obviously, the Lions and the Packers played each other in the NFC North for the last playoff spot, and that Lion victory ended up knocking both of them out. But we've got teams that look like they could be competitive. The Bears actually look like an up-and-coming team. They may have actually finally figured it out in the front office there, how to actually make progress. So it's interesting time to be a fan of a team from the AFC or NFC North. And let's take a look. We'll start with the Bengals. Now, the Bengals obviously coming off a very successful year. They've been one of the better teams in the league for the last two seasons, and really had a shot this year of repeating and going back to the Super Bowl if they could have just pulled it all together there right at the end. But they do have a little bit of turmoil, a little bit of turnover going on right now on their team. Now they've obviously got their franchise quarterback in Joe Burrow, which is step one, ground level basement foundation for any team in the NFL. If you really want to win a Super Bowl, you need that answer at quarterback. But over this course of this offseason, they lost Hayden Hurst in free agency. There have been questions, legal questions, and salary questions and things like that going on with Joe Mixon. They lost his longtime backup Samaje Perine, who signed with Denver. So we do have opportunity here for some kind of major changes here on the offense in Cincinnati. But let's take a look at it. What do you think? Is there anything that sticks out as a glaring need for you on the Cincinnati Bengals offense right now?
Well, it's the same glaring need that they've had for the last couple of years now, and that is their offensive line. And they tried to address it last year. Things were a little bit better this year, but not so much so because Joe Burrow was still getting sacked way too often. And so, they're sitting there. They've got the 28th pick in the draft, which really doesn't help. If you want to add a top quality guy, you could still get a quality guy. But I think that they're going to address that offensive line in the first round. And then, as we talked about before, the tight end position is a deep position in this draft. So I think that they are going to address that after the first round and get a guy in there to replace Hayden Hurst, and we'll see what's going on with that. But offensive line, number one, tight end, number two, and that's pretty much what I see as their need. They've got 4 picks. They got the 28, 60, 92, and 131. So they can add some players to their team. So it's interesting to me that what they're going to do. I think they can add some players and maybe even be better than they were last year.
Definitely. I agree with you there. I mean, it was a big storyline coming into last offseason. Were they going to upgrade that offensive line?
And they tried.
They tried their asses off. They brought in a lot of guys and they retooled the whole thing. And they ended up with the number 28 ranked offensive line in football, according to PFF, after last season.
That's not going to get it done.
No, it did. No, it definitely did not help things on their level. Now, to be fair, they bring in Lyle Collins, at right tackle, and he suffers an injury in that. So they come out this offseason, and now they've signed Orlando Brown Jr. off of the Chiefs, who honestly was not necessarily a lockdown left tackle, but they're going to replace their left tackle.
A lockdown left tackle, and he's not that.
Yeah. So Jonah Williams, who had played left tackle for them, then comes out and he wants to be moved now because, you brought a guy in to take my job. The Bengals are hoping to move him to right tackle, but like I just mentioned, they've already got Lyle Collins, who, when he's healthy, is a good right tackle in this league. He proved it down in Dallas. And that was the whole reason they brought him in the first place. So we'll see what happens with their right tackle position. I agree with you that they need to upgrade that offensive line. They need to help out there. On top of all of the Joe Burrow being sacked problems, Joe Mixon was one of the least efficient, least effective runners in the league last year, despite still gaining fantasy numbers. I mean, we only care about the end results of the end totals. We don't necessarily care about, per, but he was one of the least efficient runners in the league last year, and they need to figure out a way to block better for him and for Joe Burrow. And that's even if Joe Mixon's back.
Which I suspect that he will be. There's no reason not to believe that. So
and right now it sure seems like, especially after losing Samaje Perine. When they lost Perine, they lost his top backup. Now they do have Chris Evans and Travion Williams, who have been there each for a year or two now. So they've got guys that at least know the offense, but they are nowhere near the level of talent that they're nowhere near the level of talent.
You want to attack, your off. That's not the trailer you want to attach to your offensive car.
No, especially for a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. and has already been there once, so we know they can do it.
Right. And
They
they've got
need
the
to
wide
know they have
receivers,
something.
and so if they can do some stuff and are with their backfield, and as you mentioned, we're not concerned about how the numbers are, but there's more potential. Like Joe Mixon had the potential to produce more numbers.
Right.
And if he can do that, I think he can with a little bit better offensive line play for the Bengals.
Right. Give the guy a chance to get up to get ahead of steam before he gets touched, for one. I mean,
right.
Yeah,
so
let
if you
the
get
guy
hit in the
move.
backfield, it's kind of hard to gain your 4 yards if you already got a guy that's 1 yard touching you 1 yard deep.
Now, the one thing I will say with him, or one thing that I think we do have to keep in mind and mention on him, is that he is starting to get expensive for a running back in this league. For what teams want to pay their running back, Joe Mixon, because he's been in the league for a while, because he's been successful, he's starting to maybe price himself out of a range where teams are going to want to continue to pay that much for a running back. So it's not, and losing P. Ryan, it's not outside the realm of possibility that they could be looking for a running back here in the first leg, say 3-4 rounds, or maybe try and find somebody late. We know running backs can be had late. We saw it last year with Isaiah Pacheco. Now, what do you think?
You mentioned running backs. There's a guy that I'm interested in, and he's got an interesting last name. Tyjae Spears is a guy that I think that could really work out well for them, that could come out later in the draft. And he's out of Tulane. There's not a lot of press probably around the country regarding him. So he's a guy I think that could fit into that offense pretty well if they decide, as I suspect, they're going to address the offensive line. Then they're going to get their tight end because they don't have one. Then they can go out and get one of these, because you can have success, as we all know, with later round running back.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you there. Tyjae Spears from Tulane. He's a guy that could be had maybe in the third round, may even slip to a Saturday pick. So you don't have to spend the kind of draft capital on him that teams are really kind of reluctant to spend at that position right now. So he would be a possibility, very much so. Now you talk about tight end, and they did bring in. Now they signed Irv Smith Jr. from the Vikings.
Well,
does that answer that question for you, or do you still think
it does not? That builds up zero excitement in me. I don't know about you, but I don't want to have Irv Smith anywhere near my fantasy team.
Irv Smith is one of those guys, and I obviously living here in Northwest Wisconsin, I get Viking news all the time. I've seen it up close and personal. Irv Smith is one of those guys in fantasy that we've been waiting for since he was drafted. Waiting. He's always going to be. He's always going to be. He's always going to be. And he's the Devontae Parker of tight ends at this point for me. I'm done waiting for him.
I'm done waiting for him.
Over the Irv Smith
if you can't do it with Joe Burrow, you can't do it.
Right. And now they do have Devin Asiasi, who's been around for a little while too, but they really do need an answer there. And this is a deep draft for tight ends. So they do have an opportunity here to, if they want to spend high capital, they could get somebody really good. Or like I said, it's a deep enough draft. They could get somebody later down the line on day 2 or day 3 to take that. Right.
And there's another guy who's not even playing, I don't even know, Division I football. I don't even know what they call it anymore. But the guy I'm talking about is Tucker Kraft, tight end from San Diego State. Or not San Diego, South Dakota.
South Dakota.
My bad. San Diego.
There's a little difference there. But San Diego State's on everybody's minds after last night.
So South Dakota State. And he's a guy that you can wait, if you want to address that offensive line in the first round, which I highly suspect they will, they can get a guy like that and address the tight end position. And I think that'll work out fine for them.
Sure enough, 6'5", 254, ran a 4.69 at tight end, which is nice for the former Jackrabbit, running like a Jackrabbit out of the tight end spot there.
Right.
Again, a guy who could be had maybe in that third round. I don't know if he might slip to day 3 just based on, like you said, coming from a lower division. But again, a guy who, with that kind of athleticism, you add him to that 3-deep receiving core that they have, which is probably the best 3-deep receiving room in the whole league between Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. You add him to that mix, that could be really fun to watch.
Right.
So we both agree they need to address that offensive line, especially
offensive line. So if they decide to do that, how about Darnell Wright, offensive tackle from Tennessee? And we all saw how Tennessee's offense was rolling up and down the field. And so there's more than one player coming out of Tennessee, I think, that's going to have some major impact on teams in this coming up year. So
very much
he's a guy that I think they can get and solve a lot of problems for them on an offensive line.
That's right. And if they're looking to solidify the interior of that defense anywhere, the top ranked guard on the board right now in a lot of people's minds, Osiris Torrance from Florida. He's ranked right there at that 1-2 turn where they're going to be picking at the tail end of the first round here. He's a guy that wouldn't be a reach if they took him there, and could do a lot of things for their offensive line as well. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the Ravens. Now, the Ravens have been an interesting story all offseason to begin with.
All offseason. It continues to this very minute.
Yeah, because minute to minute, we don't know what's going to happen with Lamar Jackson. We've been waiting to hear, they slapped the non-exclusive franchise tender on him.
Right, which makes that he requested a trade completely and utterly meaningless.
Right.
Meaningless. He can negotiate with every single team in the NFL.
Right. There's no reason for that. He's allowed to talk to anybody he wants to. Now, obviously, if he is given an offer, the Ravens have the right of refusal. They can agree to match any offer that he's given,
right? And
he's theirs again for the year or for however long the terms of the offered contract are. But we're waiting to see the culmination of events here. We have to see what happens with Lamar Jackson. I think everybody thinks that it's a very likely scenario he goes back, but I mean, there's been a lot of talk that maybe this relationship is too fractured. Maybe he won't agree to play.
I would like to know who exactly is fractured with Lamar Jackson, because the coach is out there telling everybody, "Oh, I love him, and come on down, and let's have a big kiss here and stuff like that." So, in Baltimore's front office is pretty much known to run things the right way, and so I would really like to know where this disconnect is coming from. Probably because he talks, and there's no intermediary agent. We've talked about that before. And so if he does go back to Baltimore, his relationship with the coach would be fine, should be. And his teammates are probably getting sick of hearing this every single day. So if he doesn't want a fractured locker room, he might want to settle this and get in and call up his buddies and high five them or whatever. So
okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, and even in the extraordinary circumstance that they lose Lamar Jackson, we know they have Tyler Huntley as his main backup, who, when he's been healthy and when he's been thrown in there, has actually performed fairly well. He's been good from a fantasy standpoint too. He can score you points. Tyler Huntley, running quarterback, but that is a position where, especially if they lose Lamar Jackson between now and the draft, that they could be looking at. But I think the main thing that they need to look at, the main place they absolutely have to upgrade on that team, fantasy purposes, but also just to get themselves moving on the football field, is the wide receiver position. Now,
okay, I'm with you on that.
This is a team that was 28th in passing yards last season. They're absolutely stagnant passing offense. Now, you have to caveat that number with the idea that Lamar Jackson was hurt. Their starting quarterback was hurt for part of the year and out. Rashad Bateman missed essentially the year with an injury, and they're operating with Devin Duvernay and James Prochet as their top 2 wide receivers. Now, Bateman coming back will help them a lot, but they do sign Nelson Aguilar. Does Nelson Aguilar's signing excite you?
That moves the needle not one iota. Not one.
Right now,
And,
Baltimore doesn't pick until 22.
22. So that's going to be an issue for them if they want to maybe get one of the top guys. But at number 22, a couple of guys that I do like, Zay Flowers, the wide receiver out of Boston College, and you're going to have to help me with the Jackson Smith, the Koba.
Yep, Njigba.
I was
Jackson
way off.
Smith and Njigba. Yeah,
I was so off on that one, but out of Ohio State, and so Ohio State wide receivers know how to catch passes, and so I think that would be a good fit on their team. And this is not wide receiver related, but one of the guys that intrigues me is a running back actually for them, and I'm talking about Bijan Robinson out of Texas. And everybody in the world has them coming to the Cowboys, but they pick after Baltimore. And so if they want to make a splash, because anybody that knows how to run the running game, it's Baltimore.
The best running team in football, one of the best running teams in football annually. They have been. Now they've got some running backs there, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, but
none of them have been healthy. None of them have been consistent. And so they might surprise some guys if they decide to do that, but it wouldn't surprise me if they do.
Well, picking in 22, I definitely think that Robinson is more in play for them at 22. And like you said, some of these receivers that may fall, it's not as maybe exciting draft class for receivers as it was last year, as everybody thought it was last year.
Trey Parker out of Nebraska.
Well, there's some very good ones.
And then they got another his Ohio State brethren, Tanner McKee.
Yeah.
So there's some wide receivers to be had if they decide to do that in the draft.
Picking at 22, if they lose Lamar, doesn't leave them in position to probably grab one of the top quarterbacks. So they may have to wait for a while. But if they're going to wait for a while, you're probably better off just signing a veteran that's out on the market to back up Huntley and just roll with Huntley for this year if they end up losing Jackson.
Right.
Now, who knows? If they lose Jackson, they may pick up a higher draft pick because of the
very
two
well
firsts
do
that are tied to him.
Right.
But
Baltimore's problem is whoever they have playing at quarterback, their whole team is built around Lamar Jackson. So it's not like you can put anybody back there and he would be productive because that's not their offense.
Which is one reason why I say, they should roll with Huntley, keep Huntley around because he can run the offense that you've built there, and then look to change it up later. I think we both agree that they definitely need to address wide receiver.
Absolutely.
Bateman coming back will be a big boost for them. They still have Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the game, who unfortunately was not as healthy last year and didn't perform as great as we were hoping. I had him ranked as my number one guy.
He's probably off the board in the third round last year. He was a big, gigantic disappointment.
Yep. And I attribute most of that to what was happening on the other end of those throws, unfortunately. All right, we got a comment here from Josh Mahler, our colleague here at Belly Up Sports, says he's on a long drive. What better way to pass the time than to listen to Belly Up Fantasy Live? I'm not going to argue with that, Josh, at all. If you're looking for fantasy insight,
Josh, you're bringing on the power. We appreciate that.
If you're going to be driving, you might as well be learning. You might as well be, making use of the time. So thanks for putting in the time here and listening with us.
Leave the AC/DC till we're off the air, then you can
then you can fire that up. All right, moving on here in the AFC North now. Let's look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. They finished third in the North last year. They look to have gotten their quarterback. Kenny Pickett got thrown in, I think, earlier than a lot of us thought he would. But actually, he looks like he could perform. I wasn't
really surprised given who was ahead of him.
With Mason Rudolph, who had been there, and Mitch Trubisky. I figured with the contract that Mitch Trubisky has that it was a classic bridge quarterback type contract where they would let Kenny Pickett learn for a year or two.
Right.
They didn't see it that way. they're making the big
Well,
bucks
the
to make those
bridge was
decisions.
collapsing, so they decided to make a move. So.
Right? So they have a quarterback answer. They have some they have a couple of young running backs there, so they don't really need to look at that. Pat Fryermuth is one of the best young tight ends in the game right now.
Yes, I love him.
So when we look at the
tight end, love him.
Steelers, we look at the Steelers, the two areas I think they need to address. One for sure is offensive tackle and the offensive line there. The number 20 ranked, the number 16 ranked, I should say, offensive line last season, right in the middle of the pack. But
you can live with that. It's not great. You can live with it.
But again, you want to talk about efficiency numbers. Najee Harris was a disaster in terms of efficiency numbers, and has been for 2 years. One of the biggest reason I had Najee Harris ranked so high coming into last season was I thought that they would continue to lean on their run game more and give him the kind of volume that we saw his first year in his rookie season. Remember his rookie season, he was catching the ball all over the place. He was running the ball every other play. It seemed like he had a ton of volume. I figured that was going to continue. Now they did not throw to him as much last year, and he was not efficient again.
Well, that might, the quarterback, the answer to that problem.
Right. Now they've got Chucky Okorafor at right tackle, and he seems to have that position locked down. But at their left tackle position, Dan Moore was not quite as effective as a turnstile would have been. So I see tackle as a position where if they could shore that up and help with that, it's going to keep people off of their young quarterback there, Kenny Pickett, and allow him to continue to develop and get the ball out. But it's going to go a long way too, shoring up that offensive line towards maybe helping the efficiency numbers of this run game.
Well, I'm going in a different direction because I think they need to address that defense, which is kind of weird to say because Pittsburgh and defense, it's a ham sandwich, right? Ham and bread go together.
Right.
So they've got the 17th pick, so they're going to have some interesting options there. And I think the most interesting one for them is a player whose dad played for them. And I'm talking about Joey Porter Jr.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So out of Penn State. And so he's a local dude. So
essentially,
bringing him on board and getting that defense turned around a little bit. And then offensive line, because like the 16th, you can kind of live with that. But their defense isn't getting it done. So I think they definitely have to address that defense in the first round.
Yeah, I mentioned that coming into last season. I said the problem with that is they needed to get back to being the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that means defense, and it's meant defense for 50 years now, quite literally.
Right, Mean Joe and all the way, Polamalu.
Polamalu, and the thread has carried through. James Harrison and as you mentioned, Joey Porter. They have to have a good defense there in order to probably just feel like themselves even, right? But so I agree there completely. I think that addressing that defense and getting that shored up would go a long way toward helping this team be more successful. And if you can increase that, if you can improve your defense, obviously you're going to be putting your offense on the field more. If your offense is on the field more, we're going to see more fantasy points.
Yeah,
this is a team that was only number 20.
We're talking about.
Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
So these are not fantasy relevant things that we're really talking about, but if you get your team on the field offensively, then things will work out better fantasy-wise.
And plenty of leagues still have a team DST, the defense and special teams. This is a team that was only ranked number 20 last season.
I'm not in a league that doesn't have that, so I don't know who's playing.
Right? Yeah, it's been a movement. I know in the industry it's been a movement. People are tired of playing with kickers. People are tired.
Well, those people
relying
need
on
to stay
defenses.
away from any league I'm in because they're a part of football.
Right. So why wouldn't they be on the field? Exactly.
Why wouldn't they be? And it's kind of because you and I are in baseball fantasy now, and the catcher position was a wasteland of wastelands. But now, catcher position is actually deeper than it's been in a long, long time. So these kind of things can work out where the tight end, with all these tight ends coming in, we probably not saying that again at this point next year.
Right.
far as tight ends are concerned. So,
Right.
because I've heard people say, well, let's not have any tight ends either. So,
No.
keep
You
that
have to have
nonsense away from me.
Yeah, there's no sense in going to only the big three on offense. You're taking all of the strategy, in my opinion.
All
Then
the
you take a lot of
strategy
strategy
and
out.
all the, it's football.
Yeah, deal with it.
So if you don't want to play with a defense or a kicker, then I'm sure you'll find maybe, I don't know, Sweden or somewhere.
Maybe
Might
I'm
do
a
that.
purist. Maybe people should just get off our lawn. But yeah, no, I agree. I like keeping the positions. I like the idea of adding third receivers. I like the idea of adding second flexes and super flex and 2 quarterback leagues. I like all of those, but I don't necessarily like in redraft formats. I don't like tossing the other positions away like that.
No.
So for the Steelers, talk about that offensive line, solidify that offensive line, shore up that defense. Things are going to be better. Their running backs right now, the running backs that they have, they're too young to really bail on those guys yet.
No.
And they're not good. They're not moving on from Kenny Pickett. Obviously, they've got a young rookie quarterback on a contract that they think they can build around. At the receiver position now, they do have Deontay Johnson, who's one of the better guys in the league. Fantasy-wise, a bit of a disappointment last year, but the guy is not going to finish top 5 in targets again and not score a touchdown. So you guys can, everybody take a deep breath with Deontay Johnson.
Yeah.
They have George Pickens, who's an exciting player, but we didn't see a ton of fantasy numbers out of him last season. And of course, then they have Calvin Austin, who they drafted last year and didn't get to put on the field at all thanks to his injury. After them, they've got a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, dudes that you wouldn't recognize if they came up and
kicked you in the shin. Gunnar Olszewski, Anthony Miller, the former second-round flameout from Chicago.
There's no need to talk about any of those guys.
No. So, I mean, if they really wanted to, they could probably bring in another receiver that would help that room.
They could.
But
and another
otherwise,
guy that I like and who's got Josh Downs, as in first down, right?
First downs. Yeah, there you go.
Yep. You get first downs, wide receiver out of North Carolina.
That's going to have to be his nickname there.
Yeah. First down, you know what I'm saying? So, because after 17, they got 32, 49, and 80. And so there's going to be some guys, if they miss out on downs, how about Nathaniel Dell, wide receiver out of Houston, that they can possibly bring in there. So there are some wide receivers, even though it's not the wide receiver draft that was coming in like last year.
Yeah, it's not last year's draft. There are guys that can help. There are guys that can help a team this year. Speaking of cool nicknames, Tank Dell there, like you said, from Houston.
That's a game. I have him. I was going to mention
nickname.
him at some point. You beat me to it. Tank. Now, come on now.
I like that.
That's the guy you want on your football team if you
even if it's at wide receiver.
Even
Not many
if it's
teams
a
put
wide
a Tank at
receiver.
wide receiver.
Yeah. So
right.
So if you got you're on the clock in the 5th round, let's go ahead and bring a Tank on board.
Jump on Tank. All right. We're going to listen to our spot for Manscaped here before we get to the draft wasteland that is Cleveland here, and then we'll move on to the NFC North. But like I said, first, let's listen to our spot here from Manscaped.
Okay.
Spring has sprung, and our friends at Manscaped have the best tools for some spring cleaning. They've already helped you tidy up all the nooks and crannies of your body's basement, but this year, Manscaped can help you get the perfect presentation on that beautiful face with the new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. Make sure you look your best this spring by using code BELLYUP20 to get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. It's time to tame your mane with the Beard Hedger Pro Kit. The sun is peeking back out, which means you'll have to show your face in the daylight again. So use the kit to make sure your scruff looks award-winning, whether you got glorious beard flow or some smooth, sleek cheeks. The kit starts off with the Beard Hedger, a waterproof cordless trimmer with a rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. So no more messy drawers full of add-ons. It also comes with the titanium-coated T-blades that are tough on hair but smooth on your face, leading to a single-stroke efficiency that brings satisfaction one stroke at a time. The Beard Hedger is a high-tech piece of art in a travel-size package with a long-lasting battery, universal charging, and a strong motor. So what are you waiting for? Save 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BELLYUP20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the promo code BELLYUP20 at manscaped.com. Focus on the face and use the Beard Hedger Pro Kit for the cleanest look in the game.
All right, welcome back to that. Like we said, get on there, use that promo code BELLYUP20 for 20% off there at Manscaped. And yeah, as the ad said, they're not just for down below; they're for up top too. Now,
That's right.
It's
As I'm
slowly
well
but
aware
surely,
up
I'm
top.
getting to the point where I can start using my trimmer actually, possibly up top. Yeah, I do. It does come in. It just takes a lot longer than most people. All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at the Browns now. This is a team, the Browns, that honestly, offensively, they don't appear to have a ton of holes on this team. If Deshaun Watson is the answer at quarterback, and he better be because they're paying him like it.
Better be.
They had the number 6 ranked offensive line last season. Ethan Posick
It seems like Cleveland knows how to build an offensive line.
They have. That's
Throughout
the one
their
thing they
history,
seem like
don't know
they've
how
been
to
getting
do
right.
anything else, but they
That
can
is
build
the
an
one
offensive line.
thing that they do seem that they've gotten right. Correct. They seem to bring in guys and fit them around and perfectly there. Jedrick Wills at left tackle for them has been not spectacular. Jack Conklin has had a little bit of injury issue at right tackle after the big free agent signing there, but they keep finding guys to fill holes on that line. Wyatt Teller came out of nowhere to be an outstanding guard for them. So they don't have a ton, and they've already got Nick Chubb, who's one of the best running backs in the game. Now, we don't know if Kareem Hunt doesn't look like he'll be back. It looks like he'll go elsewhere in free agency, but he is still out there. They could always bring him back. If they don't, they do have Demetric Felton and Jerome Ford, a couple of recent draft picks behind him, cheap guys at running back, so they don't need to go there necessarily. They bring in Amari Cooper. They have Donovan Peoples-Jones. They make the big trade for Eli Moore and cost themselves their second draft pick.
So the wide receiver position is not a position of need.
No, I think, and behind those 3 guys, even they have David Bell, who was it was a 3rd round pick for them last season, one of the top receivers, in Purdue history, who looked solid. He's not a big playmaker, but he looks like a first down, move the chains type guy. Anthony Schwartz is a guy that they maybe had higher hopes for as a speedster, but they do sign Marquise Goodwin. Speaking of speedsters, a former Olympic sprinter. So and David Njoku, Harrison Bryant as a 1-2 at tight end. They bring in Jordan Akins, who has a history with Watson. So they don't look to have any offensive holes that are glaring. They've actually done a very good job this year of filling those little needs that they had on offense.
Which is fortunate for them because they don't have a pick till round 3.
Right. This is a team that not only does not have a first-round pick until our children graduate, thanks to the Deshaun Watson decision, but like we said, they trade away their second pick for Eli Moore. Now, if you could trade away a second-round pick and get back a 23-year-old, as opposed to trading away a second-round pick and getting back a 39-year-old, as the Jets are maybe looking at doing, then you're talking about a fair trade-off there in terms of your future risk and mortgaging your future kind of thing. So the Browns, I mean, honestly, most of their needs are on defense. This was a defense that underperformed last season, especially against the run. So they've already brought in Dalvin Tomlinson to shore up the interior of that defensive line, and they're going to lose Jadeveon Clowney to free agency. But even with him, they were not
be crying over that.
They were not a big sack machine. They averaged, I think, less than 2 sacks a game last year, even with Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett on that team. But they bring in Ogbonnaya Okoronkwo to shore up that other side, guy who had 5 sacks last season, but he's only got 9.5 in his career. So I don't know if that's the answer. For me, for my money, the Browns, the biggest thing they can do to help themselves and thus help us across the board would be to focus on that defensive line and the edge rusher.
I agree with that. And since they're in the third round, we're reaching for guys that could go to them, and it's quite possible none of them might have a major impact on them. You would hope, if because third rounds, and just ask the Seahawks, because they back in the day, their third, fourth, and fifth round picks turned out to be legions of boom. So it's not unprecedented.
It's not impossible, but you're talking about much more. It's much more of a dart throw and much more of a lottery ticket the later you get.
That's right.
Regardless of position there. So, like we said, not a lot there to talk about on the offensive side of things, but defensively, I think they could afford to take another shot or two, or try to do something to shore up that defensive line. And they probably need to bring in another guy to at least put in the rotation at edge to go with Garrett Okoronkwo and last year's, the 2 picks from last year, but Alex Wright especially is a guy that they're kind of high on there that they think can maintain that rotation spot for them. But bringing in somebody else who was explosive off the edge could be really big for them.
I agree.
Let's move on then to the NFC North. We'll talk about them now. We get to the Minnesota Vikings, who won the division last year, 13-4, and on the surface that looks really awesome.
Well, yeah.
And then you look and see that as a 13-4 team, they had a negative point differential on the season. They were outscored on the year by 3 points with a 13-4 record. Folks, with that identical 13-4 record, the 49ers had something like 125 positive point differential. This is a house of cards, and if they don't continue to keep the balance perfect, this thing could fall apart in a hurry, especially with an aging quarterback in Kirk Cousins.
Right.
So from my standpoint, the 2 positions they need to focus on that would really help fantasy-wise, they need more in the wide receiver room in terms of proven offensive talent.
Got a guy for you for that.
They need to take the next guy at quarterback because Kirk Cousins is not
I got a guy for you
for
for that.
All right. Let's hear them. Let's hear your guys then for who we could play in there in Minnesota.
If the first round, if they don't go defense, I think that everybody that's in their front office probably needs to be marched out of town. That's just my personal opinion on that. But if they decide to go wide receiver, then how about Quentin Johnson, wide receiver out of TCU? Now, we didn't see it when they played Georgia, but TCU was an explosive offensive team this year. And so Quentin Johnson is going to make someone very happy at the wide receiver position. And so if they decide to go wide receiver, that's the guy that you can get, because they got the 23rd pick in the first round. Yeah. That's a guy you could get at the 23 position and have an impact right there.
Yeah, it says something this year that there isn't really that one receiver or that everybody's kind of coalescing around as this is the top guy, right? Depending on where you look and where you get your rankings or who you trust the best, Quentin Johnston is the top receiver. Smith and Jigba from Ohio State is the top receiver. Some people think Flowers could be. Some people think Jordan Addison out of USC could be.
Yeah, he's a guy that multiple of teams could take
with his athleticism. So at 23, receiver seems like is a more realistic possibility than grabbing the quarterback of the future. Because
no, they're not grabbing any quarterbacks of the future.
No, and then they shouldn't. I agree with you that in the first round they should not be going quarterback. They can't be looking at that. They need to look at that defense in the first round. If they do go defense, then it's anybody's guess. They could afford to upgrade at all 3 levels.
Right. And if they decide to go defense, how about Deontay Banks, quarterback out of Maryland? as a guy. I like
not a
that
bad
stuff.
idea considering the offenses that they're going to be facing. You're going to be talking about offenses
Detroit.
that are trying to be much more
Detroit.
explosive.
Yep.
Detroit's got
Chicago,
some good run
and
receivers.
You got to figure that Green
Big
Bay,
time.
whatever happens there,
They're
they
still
know
going
how
to
to
keep
run an
throwing.
offensive.
They're still going to keep throwing the ball. You still got to
Absolutely.
defend against Christian Watson. Yeah, so I agree completely. The defense is where they need to go in round one, but when they look at offense, they need to take another wide receiver. They need to get some competition in that room, and I think they need to at least take a guy to start developing behind Kirk Cousins. Now,
Okay.
you're not talking about
for you.
a guy. You're not talking about a top guy.
No,
But
I
you
got a
have
guy
to take
for you.
somebody younger, I think.
Okay, how about Tanner McKee, quarterback, Stanford?
Tanner McKee out of Stanford. There's a guy that, we're looking at Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is not overly mobile, but he's not a statue,
No.
in the backfield either. Tanner McKee, he plays for Stanford, not necessarily always known as a high passing team. But he's a guy that offers a lot. He's 6'6", 231. He's got the size. He's almost got more size than you need.
He's playing power forward.
Right?
Stanford.
Yeah. I mean, he can. He can see over the top of the line there.
But he's not so tall because a lot of taller guys at quarterback, that doesn't work out.
No, not at all. But I mean, this guy threw for almost 3,000 yards last year in 12 games in an offense that hasn't always been known as a passing offense.
No.
He completed 60% of his passes, over 60% of his passes in college, which is what you need to see. He's a guy that you could take and you can get later. You don't have to take him in the first round like these other big names that we've talked about. And he's a guy that has some of that build potential that you could turn into a serviceable starter maybe down the line. So I agree with you completely that he could be a guy that might be able to come in, sit behind Kirk Cousins for a year, 2 at the most, I would think. And then possibly be the guy.
Right. Because Kirk Cousins, he has all that money.
Right? Yeah. You can let him go now.
Yeah. That would completely devastate your salary cap and everything else if you weren't playing him. And he played well. So it's not like it's not like you need a guy right now.
He hasn't killed that team.
If they could just keep him off prime time,
either.
I guess things would be a lot better up there in Minnesota.
Yeah,
but
if you could always play in that noon 1 o'clock slot, that noon for our time, 1 o'clock in the East. But if you could keep him always in that early afternoon slot,
life would be exceptional. But as your starting quarterback, you can roll for 1, probably 2 years, and your team's going to be all right.
Right. So, wide receiver there, definitely. Defense, I think we both agree on.
Absolutely.
Then, like I said, I think they do need to take that quarterback, or at least a developmental quarterback to get going.
Because I'm in the Dallas area, and so I was able to see Dallas versus Minnesota, and that's not something that Minnesota wants out there, circulating. This was not the highlight of our season.
No, that is not going to be. That's not going to be on the honor roll there when you're talking about highlights of the 2022 season. All right. So
and as we've seen, because they won a lot of single possession games, and that has a way of working. A ton of them.
No, there will be regression to the mean in that. Exactly.
Just as fast.
There will definitely be regression towards the mean in that area.
Yeah, they're not going to go. What was it, 10-1 or 11-1, whatever it was, in 1-score games. That's not happening 2 years in a row. So they
finishing 9 games over 500 in the NFL with a negative point differential. That's and that Cowboys game played a big part in that. But that's not going to happen again.
No, that's hard to pull off.
So now let's move to the other team then that people are talking about for next year. as possibly being the top team in the North. The Lions, the Detroit Lions, had a shot at the playoffs literally until the last day, won their last game. So they took care of the business they needed to that day. They just needed your Seahawks to have lost. But they did knock Green Bay off the pedestal there and keep them out of the playoffs and send Aaron Rodgers out of town on a sour note.
I know that hurt your, because you're a Green Bay guy up there. But,
yeah,
80% of the country loved to see that.
Oh, the Lions they were fun to watch last season. They are an up and coming team. I think they are
the
figuring
Seahawks
it out.
beat them, but they had to put 40 points on them to win that game.
I think Minnesota and Green Bay have run that division for so long, but I think they need to be really, really nervous about what's happening in Detroit and Chicago right now. Right. This division just got a lot tighter, and it'll get even tighter as soon as Aaron Rodgers finally skips town. But the Lions, here's a team again. Now they lose Jamal Williams, who led the league in rushing touchdowns last season. They bring in David Montgomery. They filled that hole. They've still got DeAndre Swift.
They did.
So
David Montgomery is a player that I like.
They've got the
like
number
him as a player. I like him as a fantasy guy. So
David Montgomery's, he can catch the ball. He can run the ball. From a fantasy standpoint, it bummed me out a little to see him go there because he is a receiving running back, but they already have DeAndre Swift, and I think that they're between the two of them. Now you're going to end up, I think, with Montgomery much more in that Jamal Williams runner role, and Swift sticking to his pass role, where if either of those guys was just the guy, you'd be talking about a fantasy monster in terms of numbers. But they're both still going to be usable, and Montgomery could be a big steal this season in that offense. But they've got that position hammered out. They've got plenty of wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're going to have a full season of healthy Jameson Williams.
There's wide receivers as far as the eye can see in Detroit.
Right. So they've got that. Looks like they've got that covered. They have committed to Jared Goff.
Not covered.
They say they've committed to Jared Goff at quarterback.
Okay.
But they could use somebody there.
I can buy it.
But I like what you just said in tight end.
Because they don't have Hawkinson.
No. They trade away TJ Hawkinson, but now Detroit's sitting in the catbird seat here from my opinion.
Because they're sitting at number 6.
They have
number
better
6. Take the defensive player, whoever is top on the board. And then one of the interesting players is, of course, Jalen Carter out of Georgia, who, if he hadn't had all these legal issues,
he could be there
coming off the board, probably number 3.
He could be. He could still be there at number 6 because of those issues. I'm saying
now he will be there at number 6. He might be there later.
Really?
Because he didn't have a pro. His pro day was disastrous, and so his stock has fallen. But if they like what they see and like what they, because you put on the tape from the season, he's blowing the doors off the place.
Oh. You can't argue with his talent, and you can't argue with the pedigree he's coming from. He played against the best of the best in college, played with the best of the best in college.
And he blew them all up when like I was mentioning about TCU, their offense was just out there. But then they played Georgia, and it was like, my kitty that's asleep over here. And so I think if they go Jalen Carter at number 6, I think that's going to be a good selection for him.
Right. I mean, he's a top 5 type prospect. If he is still there at 6, I think you jump on him. That would really help them a lot. But I like what you said about tight end. This is a team that had Hawkinson for so long, never really seemed to. He never blossomed there like we all felt he should have. He gets to Minnesota and shows that we were all justified in how we felt about him. But that's the one position on offense they don't seem to have an answer at. After they got rid of Hawkinson, they tried to roll with this mishmash of Brock Wright and Shane Zylstra, James Mitchell, and they actually didn't perform too poorly. But from a fantasy standpoint, we don't want to see a three-headed monster at any one position. We want to see a guy and the guy. And Detroit having the number 6 pick and the number 18 pick is sitting perfect
for that. The way
I
see this happening is they take 2 Georgia players.
Okay.
So they take Carter, number 6, and then at number 18, Darnell Washington, tight end, Georgia.
And that could work out absolutely perfect for them. Darnell Washington's a guy I've actually seen connected to the Packers at some point. But he's a guy that, I mean, if they skip on him at 18, there would be a chance he could still even be there in the next round for them.
Maybe
deep tight end draft. Deep tight end draft this season. You've got Dalton Kincaid out of Utah. Meyer out of Notre Dame.
Yeah, Utah. All right. So you know.
There you go. We've got Meyer out of Notre Dame. You got Luke
Meyer's going
Musgrave
to
out
be
of
the
Oregon
first
State.
pick in the draft, which I suspect we'll talk about here in a minute.
You already talked about Tucker Kraft coming out of South Dakota State. Sam Laporta out of Iowa.
Iowa, you know, they like their beef up there,
and they turn out tight ends.
Any tight end from Iowa is going to be a big boy. So
George Kittle would love to talk to you about how things are going in Iowa. But I think that they are definitely in position to be able to take the one and not have to reach for one at all because of the fact that they have that number 6 pick in the first round. Having that 6 and having that number 18, they can go any way they want to go. They're sitting in a perfect position right now to really improve that team a lot. I do think they should look at taking a developmental quarterback, but I like the idea that they've committed to Goff as being their guy. He's been solid. He has taken a team to the Super Bowl before.
The Rams ran him out of town, on a rail.
Right. They ran him out, but he did take them to a Super Bowl.
It was kind of like Frankenstein and with the torches and everything else. And but he went up there and he's played well. He's a guy, you talk about fantasy. He's a guy that if you're in a 2 quarterback league and he's your second quarterback, you are set.
Oh, you're sitting great if he's your number 2. If he's your number 2 quarterback, you're sitting extremely well. I mean, he's been a solid guy for most of his career, right? He wasn't spectacular, and he wasn't
in the Super Bowl, and everybody was soured on him because of that.
If you're talking about a guy who was taken with the 12th overall pick or the 20th overall pick, nobody would bat an eye at what Jared Goff has done in his career. But being the top overall pick, people had a lot more expectation for him. Now he took his team to the Super Bowl. The team that drafted him, he took them to the Super Bowl.
Right.
And he was the number 10 quarterback in fantasy last season. If you have the number 10 guy as your number, like you said, is your number 2 in fantasy,
because nobody was taking him early in a draft.
No, nobody's jumping on him as a top 10 quarterback draft-wise.
No. So if you have him on your fantasy team, you're set. And
how many people would have drafted him?
Yeah, if you're in redraft and you want to hold out for a little bit to take a quarterback,
you could make it go over with Jared Goff.
You could make it because their offense is firing on all cylinders.
How many people would have drafted Jared Goff ahead of Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Tua, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott? All guys that were drafted before Jared Goff who finished behind him.
That you mentioned Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Because Kyler Murray is the guy I drafted.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't take him.
No.
Wish I had.
Right.
But I wouldn't have to replace my quarterback at the end of the season, right when the fantasy playoffs were getting ready to start.
He was the number 10 overall scoring quarterback last season, and he went after all of those guys. But I do think that they do need to take a developmental guy behind him so that they can have somebody at least getting ready for the future in case they do decide to move on from him. He's not going to get cheaper as he goes on. And we've seen again that the recipe for success in this league seems to be building around a quarterback on a rookie contract.
Well,
Detroit
you
looks
can
like
look
they're
at- you can look
they're
at
setting
Russell
themselves
Wilson
up for
as
a long haul.
example A of that,
Yeah, exactly.
right? 'Cause
Exactly.
after they sign into a big deal, they haven't been in the Super Bowl not one time.
All right, we are going to, before we get to the bottom two teams, and it's weird to say that, bottom two teams in Green Bay and Chicago, we're going to listen to a spot here from SeatGeek, and then when we get back on the other side, we're going to wrap this up here talking about the NFC North. We'll figure out what the Packers are finally maybe going to do, and the Bears as well.
Maybe.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan from No Credentials Required to talk to you about one of our newest partners at Belly Up Sports, SeatGeek. Yeah, live sports is great on television, but the feeling of being at the arena is a priceless experience. That's why our friends at SeatGeek are there to help you find the best tickets at the best prices. Not only can you get tickets to sporting events, you can also get tickets to concerts, comedy shows, musicals, and more. Search for your desired event now at SeatGeek.com, enter promo code BellyUpSports at checkout, and you save $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek. Life's an event. We have the tickets.
All right, thanks to our friend for that one. But now let's get to Green Bay. Now they're obviously I want to talk about them because they're my team, but we don't know where they're going to be sitting in the draft yet until the whole Aaron Rodgers situation shakes out. I don't think they're getting the number 13 pick.
No,
if they do get the number 13 pick,
way.
if they do get the number 13 pick from New York, it'll be because they give them the 15 back. We're not going to end up in a situation in Green Bay where they've got 2 picks here in the first round this year. It's just not going to happen. Everybody in Cheesehead land needs to let that dream go. I know it's Aaron Rodgers. I know he'll be in the Hall of Fame someday. I know he won you a Super Bowl, but it's just not going to happen. All right. So I think that the second round pick that they picked up from the Browns, the Jets picked up from the Browns in the Eli Moore trade, I think that comes into play here. It would not be the craziest thing and out of the question to see both of those second round picks the Jets have come to Green Bay. I think the more likely scenario is a second, possibly one of those seconds this year, and a conditional next year that could become a first if Rodgers wins them the Super Bowl and is the MVP and decides and signs on that he's going to play for the next 8 years.
Then we sprinkle fairy dust all over the land and everybody's smiling.
Toss it around, right?
Yeah.
No, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen with them until this Aaron Rodgers situation shakes out.
It looks more and more likely to me that whatever trade that they do finally make is not going to happen until after the draft.
It may not even happen until after the draft, right? It saves the Packers money if they can wait, if they can designate this as a post-June 1st type thing.
And as you mentioned, if they just move up 2 slots in the first round, there's really not a lot to gain.
Not necessarily.
So maybe that's what I see happening now, is they don't do this till after June 1st.
Yeah, you might be able to talk the Jets. I mean, the Jets have kind of painted themselves into a corner here too. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
this is a team that is expecting to compete.
Into a corner on this one.
This is a team that is expecting themselves to compete, but they need a quarterback, and they have exhausted all other options by now. They have to bring in Aaron Rodgers. They have to bring Aaron Rodgers in, but you might be able to get them to agree to like some kind of future first, not conditional. But you're not getting that 13 this season. And if you wait until after the draft, it probably makes more financial sense from the Packers standpoint. So I'm not expecting it to affect what they do in the first round.
So even at number 15, there's some interesting selections that could be on the board for them. And they need a tight end. I'm sure that you were not crying, in your pillow that Robert Tonyan is not there anymore.
Robert Tonyan's a solid player. Robert Tonyan is a solid player in the NFL. He's one of those guys. He's a classic guy. I say it all the time. I would love him on my real life team, and I loved having him on my real life team. But fantasy-wise, he was just way too inconsistent. I know he had the big year 2 years ago, but it was all touchdown dependent. The guy had 10 touchdowns, and he had barely 50 catches. You're not going to catch a touchdown 1 out of every 5 receptions in this league. No one does that.
Not
No
even
one
Jerry
does
Rice
that.
would do something like
That
that.
cannot hold, and it did not hold for him.
Didn't.
Very touchdown dependent. Sort of along the lines of Dawson Knox. Just very dependent on
Right.
getting those red zone looks and making the catch in the end zone every time they're down there. And if not, he's just a guy. So, it's a nice move for the Bears, I think, as a compliment to Cole Kmet. We'll talk about the Bears in a minute.
Right.
But, yeah, it doesn't kill me that they lose him.
No.
But
So they need to replace him.
they
with
do
a
need to
solid
replace
player,
him.
right? And the player that I believe that will be there at number 15, the top tight end on my board, and that's Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame.
Out of Notre Dame.
That's Michael Mayer, not Michael Myers.
And I have seen him. I have seen him connected to them in a ton of mock drafts. A lot of people are thinking that he's one of the, he's one of the short list for them to take there. The Packers have not necessarily traditionally been a team that drafts for need. They traditionally take best player available, but you might
He may be the best player available.
have that convergence there of best player available fitting a need for you there. He's got a real high floor, Mayer does.
Real high floor, and his ceiling
Yeah.
is through the roof.
This is a guy who can play the position, play it well, do everything. Ran a 4.7 in the 40. But again, who knows what they're going to do, because they have that history, frustratingly enough, from Packers standpoint, of not necessarily drafting ever for need and only drafting best player available. Now, if that's the case, it would be awesome if it ends up being a tight end. It would also help them out. They could also use another receiver
Because all their receivers are now in New York.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. Alan Lazard's in New York. Randall Cobb is on the wish list in New York, apparently. Now, Watson looked really good last year when he played. Looked explosive.
That's the key.
After the first pass of the season, he looked great. Dropping that first pass of the year didn't help things. But between him and Romeo Doubs, who looked solid and looked like a viable number 2 type receiver in this league, outside of them,
stay on the field as well.
Outside of them, they've only got 3 receivers on the whole roster.
So they definitely, even if they do the tight end thing, there's wide receivers that need to be tabbed.
Definitely.
For Green Bay.
Definitely. They need to bring in another receiver.
And 2 tight ends from wide receivers from Tennessee, possibly Cedric Tillman, Jalen Hyatt. As I mentioned, Tennessee's offense looked spectacular.
And those are guys they could get
that they could pick up after the first round that make a big difference.
Those are guys they could grab probably on day 2, especially now, like we said, if the trade goes through and they do happen to pick up extra second day picks. Those are guys that would be available for them.
Right.
But I think that they do need to address that early in this draft. That and tight end.
And if for some reason they don't go tight end, like you said, maybe they decide some other position, which I can't fathom, but is more, the player is better or whatever it is. So then I see because my home state is Utah, right? And I see my guy from Utah coming over there and camping out in your home state.
in my neck of the woods.
So I'm talking about Dalton Kincaid, and that's not a bad fallback position at all.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I don't think there's no chance that he's Mayer. I don't think, because Mayer's the floor and ceiling are both high on him. So, but if they don't get him, I think Kincaid can do some things for them that they're going to like.
There we go. The other possibility that scares the hell out of me is that they, at some point in this draft, take another young quarterback. They have never shied away from doing that. When Aaron Rodgers' first year in the league, they took Brian Braum out of Louisville, and that's also when they took his name is escaping me right now because I'm an old man. They from LSU. They took 2 quarterbacks that year. Rodgers' first year in the league, his 2 backups were both rookies. They're not a team that's afraid to do that.
They've been doing that since Favre was the
But
quarterback.
it worries me if they do it this year. Let the guy, if Love is your guy and you claim he's your guy and you all claim to love him, show him that. Let him be the guy for a year.
Yeah, the whole thing slides off the mountain if he's not the guy.
Bring in a veteran to back him up that you can then, that you're okay if Love completely flames out, right? But bring in that veteran. Don't bring in somebody that he's going to be looking over his shoulder all year, wondering if people want to replace him or not. Matt Flynn is the guy that I'm thinking of. I can't remember. I couldn't remember his damn name, but they brought in Brian Brown and Matt Flynn behind Aaron Rodgers his first year as a starter. Don't do that same thing to Aaron Love or Jordan Love. It's been a weird situation already. If you're going to hand him the team, hand him the damn team. You need somebody else other than Danny Etling behind him, but don't do it in the draft. That's just my take on it. Get a wide receiver, get a tight end for us, help us out.
You need both of those.
Then jump on defense all day long, and I'll be happy with it. Let's move on to the Chicago Bears real quick here before we get on out of here. This is another team that looks like they've addressed their needs pretty well here in free agency. They lose David Montgomery. Well, they bring in Deontay Foreman. They already had Khalil Herbert, and they also brought in Travis Homer from Seattle. They're set there. They are set there.
They surprisingly their skill positions in on the offense
look really solid.
You're looking good. So everything's I think is going to be fine there as they they get the wide receiver coming over from
they trade for DJ Moore with the number 1 pick
DJ
swap
Moore,
that they did.
who I have drafted 2 years in a row. I don't know what my fascination is exactly with him, but
you got Dwayne Bowe syndrome.
That's probably better in real life than in fantasy. So, but if you've got him on your dynasty team, you better, because he's got a quarterback now.
No.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm taking no offers for him.
Right. Yeah. No. Not right now. I agree with you that their skill positions look really set. Bringing in more now, you can bump Mooney down to that number 2, which he probably is anyway. You've got Chase Claypool, who is still really young. All three of these guys. Really young still, could grow with Fields.
And Chase Claypool is a guy that better step it up.
He needs to.
Right? Or he's going to be, walking down the side of the road by this time next year.
They brought in Tunyon, as we mentioned. So they've got Kmet and Tunyon now at tight end.
And Kmet is a guy that I like.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that's on my dynasty team.
And obviously, fantasy-wise, at quarterback, too, with Justin Fields. They are set at those positions.
Absolutely. And so they made their decision, and it was the right one to not take the quarterback at the number 1 draft spot. I was a little surprised that they made the move as fast as they did to agree to the trade.
I'm surprised they made a smart move for once.
Right. And so I think that's going to work out for them, that they traded back to number 9. And because we talked about the Lions earlier, if Jalen Carter continues to slide, he could be there at number 9.
And if he was, that would help them out a ton.
That would help them out because this is another team. We were talking about 85 Bears and all that stuff.
Right.
Defense. They need to get back to their identity. Monsters of the Midway and all that.
Get back to their identity. Yep.
There's no monsters of the Midway. No. And if there were any, they traded them last year anyway.
They traded all of their defensive stars away last year. And they do not, there is no Urlacher, there's no Singletary on this team.
Players. They need
there's no Richard Dent, there's no Khalil Mack. There's no Peanut Tillman on this team. And they do need to concentrate on defense.
So they need defensive players, they need offensive linemen to keep Fields standing up.
I agree.
Because if he's going to be a running quarterback, which he is, they need to keep him as safe as they can and maybe call up Russell Wilson and find out how it was that he was because he slid out of danger better than any other quarterback I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
How do you do it
now? But he could, he could get out of bounds and he'd get down, and he was a guy that's not big, of course.
No.
And when he did get hurt, it's because he hit his hand on somebody's helmet. It wasn't because he got sacked.
Right.
So that's what they need to make sure Justin Fields doesn't wind up, missing 6 games like Lamar, does.
Right.
So get him up to speed on that. Get your defense, maybe some offensive linemen, and I think you're set.
I agree completely. This was the number 32 ranked DST in fantasy last season. Any improvement they can make on
and
defense.
You cannot be, if you're the Bears.
No, you can't be the last.
You can't be outside the top 15.
No. If they can improve that offensive line and protect Fields, let him learn and play with these skill position players that they have brought in.
Right.
If they can shore up that defense, like I said, this is a team that could be ascendant in the NFC North. And I think that Minnesota and Green Bay have to be very worried about what's going on in Detroit and Chicago right now. All right. So go ahead.
So I was
last
going
point.
to say, because if Jalen Carter is not there at number 9, then the player I'm taking, Paris Johnson, offensive tackle out of Ohio State.
There you go.
At number 9, your offensive, that sets you up.
If you can move Tevin Jenkins to guard, where he played pretty well last season, and replace him at tackle and keep him in the mix, though, they could really strengthen that offensive line in a hurry. They did take Alex Leatherwood too, the inexplicable first-round pick from the Raiders a couple of years ago, who was not a first-round talent but got taken anyway out of Alabama. But they do still have him. He's still around. Whether he's a tackle or not, whether he needs to play inside or not, they have options there. But especially if they could take a tackle, I agree with you there. They would really set themselves up to possibly improve that offensive line in a hurry. Why don't you let people know where we can find you, Kevin? That's going to do it for us today. Let us know what you got coming up and where we can find you at.
Well, you can always find me. This is only my first show of the day, because coming up at 7:00 Central. That's we got the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball Show. Vince and I do, and then I have an article that I do at least once a week on fantasy baseball right now. And baseball is here.
Underway.
It's underway.
We are
and
in
so
full swing
but
now.
there are a lot of players that are injured already, and so there's a lot of openings that guys have on their teams that I'm going to have an article that's going to come out that who you should look for off your waiver wire. And so that's something you can look for out of me. And I'd just like to say, pat myself on the back, all right, a little bit. Because I did an article last week, and I got it on Reddit. And the post that I put out had 25,000 views.
And boy.
So,
boom.
So, I put out the post-draft pickups that you could have after the draft and everything's settled down. And as I mentioned, players are hurt and whatnot. And people just seem that blew their minds a little bit, I guess. So,
well, there you go. There you have it.
That's what's going on for me.
Excellent. All right. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at STTChaseFFB. I give my thoughts on every signing there, and I'll be giving my thoughts all the way through the draft on what teams need and what moves have been made. I will have a couple articles coming out this week dealing with the topic we dealt with today, the AFC and NFC North and what those teams need in the draft. I'll go a little more in depth into it than we probably went today, but that'll be happening all the way through the draft as well. So until then, for Kevin Wilson, I am Chase Thornton. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, if you like what you're seeing, hit the like and subscribe button. If you're on YouTube there, subscribe
hit that
to Belly
like
Up
button,
Sports.
subscribe, and
that's right.
We're grateful for everyone that joins us.
Check out all the other great content at Belly Up Sports, Belly Up Fantasy Sports, Belly Up Media. But until next time, until next Sunday, same time, same channel, Slanjava.